Okay, let's unpack this a bit. Have you ever noticed how, I don't know, we can be super careful about like small buys?
Oh, yeah, comparing prices on, like, Amazon for hours.
Exactly, reading all the reviews. But then when it comes to the big stuff like investing or maybe dealing with debt, it's like a whole different brain clicks on.
It is, isn't it? You might know someone, or maybe it's even you listening, who tracks every penny spent on coffee, but then makes these kind of impulsive moves with their retirement fund.
Or diligently saves in one account, which is great. But meanwhile, they're paying like crazy high interest on a credit card.
It's this weird disconnect, right, between what we sort of know is logical and what we actually do.
It's a real puzzle. And what's interesting, as you said, is it's often not about lacking the knowledge, is it?
Not at all. I mean, we're drowning in financial information these days. The real challenge, I think, is getting underneath that to the human side of it. These often irrational forces that really shape how we act with money.
Right. And that's exactly what we're diving into today, the psychology of money. We're going to go deep on these hidden influences, these things that guide our financial lives without us always realizing it.
And we're drawing a lot from Morgan Housel's book, The Psychology of Money, which is fantastic.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
But also pulling in some other really interesting research from behavioral finance. And the whole point is to help you, listening right now, get a clearer picture of your own money habits.
To move beyond just the spreadsheets and the purely rational models.
Yeah, to understand the why. Why do you make the money decisions you make?
Because, let's face it, personal finance isn't just math. It's so wrapped up in our feelings, our
Mm.
personal histories, those mental shortcuts, heuristics, as we call them.
Right, the mental shortcuts we all use. So, okay, to help us navigate all this, we've got a bit of a structure.
The idea.
We'll kick off with some core concepts from this way of thinking. Then we'll zoom in on one idea we think is really key, put it in the spotlight, then some practical tips you can actually use. After that, we'll bust a few common money myths.
Oh, good one. Lots of those around.
Definitely. And then we'll wrap it all up with a final thought for you to chew on. And like we said, we'll be referencing Housel's book and some broader research as we go.
Sounds great. So I guess the starting question is, if all the advice is out there, why do people still behave so differently with money? Why the huge range of outcomes?
Well, that actually leads perfectly into our first big idea, something Housel really stresses. No one's crazy.
Yes. Love this one.
It's this idea that, everyone's understanding of money comes from their own unique life path, their experiences.
Totally. So what looks like a completely irrational financial move to you? Well, it might make perfect sense to someone else based on where they've been.
Exactly. Think about someone who grew up during, say, really high inflation versus someone who's only known stable prices. Their view on holding cash is going to be fundamentally different, right?
Absolutely. Or someone whose family really struggled financially versus someone who grew up with, a lot of security. Their whole relationship with risk, with debt, it's shaped by that history.
Yeah, Housel makes that point. Your personal experience with money, which is just this tiny fraction of all financial history, feels like the whole story to you. It forms most of your understanding.
So you might have insights I don't, and I might see things you don't just because our lived experiences are different, not because one of us is smarter, just different perspectives.
Which brings us kind of naturally to the next point, luck and risk.
hmm The dynamic duo that we often conveniently forget about.
Or at least downplay, right?
Right.
It's so easy to overlook how much these two really shape where we end up financially.
We love stories about skill and hard work, and those things are crucial, obviously. But the reality is usually this messy mix of skill, effort, timing, risk, and just sheer luck, good or bad.
Yeah, Housel uses that great example of Bill Gates. Brilliant guy, worked incredibly hard, no doubt.
Yeah.
But he also had this amazing bit of luck getting access to a school computer way back when that was almost unheard of.
Right, and he contrasts that with Gates's friend Ken Evans, who is apparently just as bright and interested, but, well, didn't have that same lucky break, that same access, didn't get the same outcome.
And luck and risk are often two sides of the same coin, aren't they?
Very much so. A risky bet pays off, and suddenly it's hailed as genius foresight. The same risk goes bad, and it's called foolish recklessness.
Hindsight bias.
Exactly. It's incredibly hard to objectively weigh luck and risk, especially when looking at our own lives or judging others. We like neat stories of control, but accepting the role of chance, it leads to a bit more humility, maybe. Less harsh judgment.
Yeah, I think so. Okay, so we've got different experiences shaping our views and the big impact of luck and risk. Let's dig into another concept I found really powerful. Never enough.
Yes. This one hits close to home for a lot of people, I think.
It feels very human. This constant chase for more and the real struggle to just decide, okay, this is enough.
It's that moving goalpost problem. Housel says the hardest financial skill is getting the goalpost to stop moving. It's not just about making money, it's about managing your own expectations.
You reach a goal, you think you'll feel satisfied, but almost immediately you're looking at the next run on the ladder, right?
Mm-hmm. That anecdote Housel shares is perfect. Kurt Vonnegut and Joseph Heller at a party hosted by a billionaire.
Oh yeah, tell her that one.
So the billionaire apparently points out he made more money in a single day than Heller earned from his masterpiece, Catch-22, over its entire lifetime.
Ouch. Kind of a rough thing to say.
Right. But Heller's reply was just brilliant. He said something like, yes, but I have something he will never have.
Enough.
Enough, exactly. It just cuts right through it. Their ambition, which is fine, but then there's this kind of insatiable hunger that never actually leads to contentment.
So figuring out what enough actually means for you personally, that's fundamental. What lets you live a good life, feel secure.
It's the key to finding some peace and avoiding taking dumb risks just to keep climbing some endless ladder.
Okay, speaking of things growing, let's talk about confounding compounding.
The magic of compounding. Or maybe the easily misunderstood magic.
Yeah, it's where small, consistent steps over a long, long time can lead to these really huge results. But our brains aren't really wired for it, are they?
Not naturally, no. We tend to think in straight lines, linear thinking, additive. But compounding is exponential. It curves upwards, slowly at first, then faster and faster.
Like that snowball rolling downhill.
Exactly. It picks up more snow, gets bigger, rolls faster. But we often underestimate just how big that snowball can get given enough time.
Housel uses Warren Buffett as the prime example. Something like, 95% or more of his wealth came after his 65th birthday.
It's an astonishing statistic. Something like $81 billion out of $84 billion accumulated after his mid-60s. It just hammers home the power of time in the market, consistency over decades.
It's not about finding the next 10 baggers overnight. It's about patience, discipline, letting that growth happen year after year.
Which leads to maybe the most important rule of compounding.
Don't interrupt it unnecessarily.
Exactly. Getting impatient, tinkering too much, pulling out because the market dipped. That can really sabotage the long-term power. You got to let it work.
Okay, so compounding helps wealth grow. But the next idea is crucial. Getting wealthy versus staying wealthy. Turns out they're not the same skill.
Not at all. Very different mindsets, different strategies.
Getting wealthy might involve taking some bold risks, spotting opportunities, being optimistic, maybe a bit aggressive.
Right. But staying wealthy, that often requires the opposite. It requires discipline, a good dose of paranoia, frugality, knowing when not to take risks.
Housel has that great line. There is no reason to risk what you have and need for what you don't have and don't need.
That's the core of staying wealthy right there, protecting your base. Survival becomes the priority.
He tells those contrasting stories like Jesse Livermore, the famous trader who made and lost fortunes.
Versus someone like Abraham Jermansky, who maybe didn't reach the same peaks, but focused more on preservation and survived longer.
It shows that getting there is one challenge, but hanging on to it. That requires understanding downside risk and avoiding those catastrophic mistakes that can wipe you out.
Building that margin of safety, having reserves, not too much debt, keeping a level head. Survival is the key to letting compounding work its magic over the long run.
Okay, and that brings us to our last core concept for this section. Tails, you win.
This is such a fascinating, almost counterintuitive idea about outcomes.
It really is. Especially in investing, right?
Yeah.
The idea that most of the results often come from a tiny number of extreme successes.
Exactly. You don't have to be right all the time, or even most of the time. A few huge wins, the positive tail events, can make up for a lot of mediocre results or even losses.
Housel quotes some wild stats, like how a huge chunk of stocks in the broad market actually lose significant value over time.
Yeah, something like 40% of stocks in the Russell 3000 historically lost most of their value and never recovered.
Wow.
But the overall index gains, they come from a small fraction, maybe 7% or so, of companies that become massive winners. The tail.
So the pressure we feel to pick every winner perfectly is kind of misplaced.
According to this idea, yes. It suggests it's more about diversification and just staying in the game long enough to make sure you capture some of those rare, massive wins when they happen. You can be wrong often, as long as your wins are big enough when you're right.
It shifts the focus from prediction accuracy to resilience and participation.
Precisely. Being able to withstand the losses and stick around for the big winners.
Okay, these concepts are fantastic food for thought. Now, let's transition to our spotlight idea for today. Wealth is what you don't see.
This one really cuts against the grain of how society often portrays wealth.
Totally. We tend to equate wealth with visible stuff, right?
Yeah.
The fancy car, the huge house, the expensive watches.
The outward signs. But Housel argues, quite convincingly, I think, that true wealth isn't the stuff you buy, it's the assets you haven't spent.
It's the savings, the investments, the money that's working for you behind the scenes. Money you haven't converted into visible consumption yet.
And what does that unseen wealth give you?
Freedom, options, flexibility, security, control over your time. That's the real payoff.
Exactly. It's less about impressing others and more about having autonomy in your own life. He makes that distinction between being rich, which might just mean high income, lots of spending.
Keeping up appearances.
Right. Versus being truly wealthy, which is about that underlying financial strengths, those assets you don't necessarily see.
Which leads to that brilliant man-of-the-car paradox.
Oh, yeah. Explain that one. It's so good.
Okay, so you see someone drive by in a really expensive, flashy car. What's your first thought? Probably, wow, that person must be rich, successful.
Mm-hmm. You admire the car.
You admire the car. You might make assumptions about the driver, but you don't actually know their situation. They could be drowning in debt to afford it.
Okay.
But here's the paradox. When you are the one driving the fancy car trying to get that admiration, what are other people doing?
Admiring the car. Not necessarily me.
Exactly. They're thinking about how cool the car is and maybe imagining themselves driving it.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily thinking, wow, that driver's amazing and I respect them immensely.
Huh. So spending money to show people how much money you have is kind of futile because they're mostly looking at the stuff, not you.
Pretty much. It's a powerful insight into the psychology of status symbols. True wealth, the kind that gives you control and peace of mind, is usually invisible.
So focusing on building that hidden foundation is way more important than just the outward show.
Couldn't agree more. Okay, that brings us nicely into some practical tips. Things you can actually do based on these ideas.
Actionable stuff. Good. Let's start with the most fundamental, maybe.
Save money. Sounds obvious, right? But the psychology here is key.
It's not just that you save, but how much relative to your income. Housel argues your savings rate is way more powerful for building wealth than your income level or even your investment returns over time.
And the great thing about your savings rate is
You control it, mostly anyway. Unlike market returns or maybe even your income in the short term, you have a lot of say over how much you don't spend.
Housel calls it the gap between your income and your ego.
Huh. That's a good way to put it. Resisting that urge to spend more just because you earn more? Keeping your lifestyle in check allows that gap, your savings, to widen.
And focusing on things you control, like the savings rate, and also minimizing those investment fees we talked about earlier, that's where your power lies.
Absolutely. Okay, tip number 2. Aim for reasonable over rational.
I love this one. It feels like permission to be human.
It really is. Traditional finance pushes this idea of the perfectly rational economic man making optimal calculations.
Which nobody actually is.
Right. Behavioral finance shows our emotions are deeply involved. So trying to stick to a strategy that's mathematically perfect but makes you anxious or lose sleep, it's probably not going to work long term.
You won't stick with it.
Exactly. So aim for reasonable. Find strategies that are good enough, that feel comfortable to you, that you can realistically maintain through market ups and downs.
Like Housel mentions Nobel Prize winner Harry Markowitz, the father of modern portfolio theory.
Yeah, even he admitted his own personal retirement investments were pretty simple, like a basic 50-50 split between stocks and bonds. Not because it was theoretically optimal, but because it helped him sleep at night and avoid making rash decisions based on regret.
Reasonable, not necessarily hyper-rational. Okay, tip 3. Build in room for error.
The margin of safety concept. Crucial.
Life is unpredictable.
Yeah.
Things go wrong. Unexpected stuff happens.
Always. So building a buffer into your financial life is just smart. It could be a bigger emergency fund than you think you need.
Or just budgeting more frugally, spending less than you could.
Or even just having flexibility in your timelines and your thinking, not assuming everything will go exactly according to plan A.
Because it probably won't.
Exactly. This buffer doesn't just protect you from disasters. It also gives you the breathing room to maybe take advantage of opportunities that pop up when others are forced to sell or are panicking.
Housel uses that barbell analogy. Sometimes be super safe with one part of your money, maybe take some calculated risks with another, but always prioritize survival.
Yeah. Ensuring you can stay in the game is paramount.
Okay, next tip, and this is a big one for planning. You'll change.
Oh, definitely. We tend to think our current selves, our current goals and desires will last forever.
But they almost certainly won't. Who you are in 10, 20, 30 years,
Yeah.
your priorities might be totally different.
So, making extreme financial plans based only on your current view can be risky. Locking yourself into something super rigid might not serve your future self well.
Like Housel points out, how many people actually end up working in the field they got their degree in? It's surprisingly low.
Yeah, something like only 27% use their degree directly. People change paths, change minds. It's normal.
So the advice is to build in flexibility. Avoid anchoring too heavily to past decisions or sunk costs if they no longer make sense for who you are becoming.
And remember that compounding rule, don't interrupt it unnecessarily. Sometimes sticking to a plan that no longer fits you can be just as bad as panicking and selling. It's about adapting thoughtfully.
Good point. Okay, tip number 5. Nothing's free.
The no free lunch rule of finance.
Everything has a price. Even if it's hidden, that potential for high returns in the stock market.
The price is volatility, uncertainty, dealing with drawdowns. That's the fee you pay for admission to potential long-term growth.
So trying to get the reward without being willing to pay the price, like wanting high returns with zero risk, it just doesn't usually work.
Right. You need to understand the cost associated with your financial goals and be mentally prepared to pay it. Market swings are a feature, not a bug, if you want those long-term equity returns.
Except the fee. Okay, and the final tip, you and me.
This is about staying in your own lane, financially speaking.
Don't take your cues from people playing a different game, right?
Exactly. Your neighbor gets a new Tesla, your colleague is bragging about some hot stock tip, but their goals, their time horizon, their risk tolerance might be completely different from yours.
What works for them, or what seems to be working for them, might be totally wrong for you.
It's so easy to get caught up in FOMO, fear of missing out, or social comparison, but you need to understand your game. What are your goals? What's your timeline?
Housel suggests writing down your investment mission or philosophy.
Yeah, just to keep yourself grounded. Focus on your own plan, stick to it, and tune out the noise from people playing a different sport on a different field.
Great set of tips. Okay, let's switch gears and tackle some common money myths. Things people often believe that just aren't quite right.
Let's bust them. Myth number 1. You need to be super smart, like a finance genius, or have tons of sophisticated knowledge to succeed financially.
Yeah, the idea that it's all about IQ points or complex strategies.
Housel argues, and I think behavioral finance supports this strongly, that your behavior is often way more important than your intelligence.
Patience, discipline, managing your emotions, that kind of stuff.
Exactly. Ordinary people with good behavioral habits who avoid major mistakes and save consistently can often build more wealth than brilliant people who are impulsive or overconfident.
So behavior trumps brains sometimes. Okay, myth number 2. You need a high income to build wealth.
This is a big one that holds people back. They think, well, I don't earn 6 figures, so I can't really get ahead.
But as we talked about with the savings tip,
Your savings rate is the real engine. How much you save as a percentage of what you earn is more critical than the absolute amount you earn, especially over the long term.
you have more control over that savings rate.
Totally. Living below your means, being content with less, allows you to save and build wealth even on a modest income. Wealth isn't just about earning more, it can also be about desiring less.
Good point. Myth 3. The past is a perfect guide to the future in finance.
Ah, the crystal ball fallacy. Looking backward and assuming things will repeat exactly.
History definitely offers lessons, context.
For sure. Understanding past cycles, past mistakes, it's valuable. But relying on past data as a precise roadmap for the future, that's dangerous.
Why? Because things change.
Massively. Innovation happens. Unexpected events, pandemics, wars, technological shifts constantly alter the landscape. The future isn't just a replay.
Housel calls it the historians as prophets. Mistake.
Right. The biggest economic events are often surprises, things nobody saw coming based on past data alone. Even someone like Benjamin Graham, the father of value investing, constantly updated his methods.
So learn from history, but don't get trapped by it. Okay, myth number 4. Pessimism is smart. Optimism is naive.
Oh, pessimism definitely sounds more sophisticated, doesn't it?
It does. Prophets of doom always seem to get taken more seriously. Be careful. Danger ahead.
But Housel makes a strong case for rational optimism. Not blind optimism, but a realistic belief that, over the long haul, the odds are generally in favor of progress and things getting better.
Because, historically, they mostly have, despite setbacks.
Yeah. The world tends to solve problems. Economies tend to grow. Innovation continues. Pessimism is seductive because bad news grabs attention and losses feel more potent than gains.
But pessimists often just extrapolate current bad trends indefinitely.
Without accounting for how people and systems adapt and find solutions, long-term optimism has generally been the more profitable bet.
Interesting perspective. Myth 5. You should strive to be totally, completely rational in all financial decisions.
We kind of hit this with the reasonable rational tip, but it's worth calling out as a myth.
The ideal of the emotionless, calculating investor.
It's mostly an unattainable ideal for humans. We have emotions, biases. Trying to suppress them entirely often backfires.
So aiming to be reasonable, making decisions you can live with, that align with your temperament, that let you sleep at night, is actually more effective.
Often, yes, it's more sustainable. A strategy you can stick with is better than a theoretically perfect one you abandon at the first sign of trouble.
Makes sense. And the final myth. Buying expensive stuff brings true happiness and respect.
The ultimate consumerist myth, maybe.
Yeah, tying self-worth and social standing to visible possessions.
We circled back to this with wealth is what you don't see and the man in the car paradox. True wealth gives you control over your time, your options. That's much more strongly correlated with happiness than owning fancy things.
And respect from others. Does it really come from the brand of your watch or car?
Probably not genuine respect. Housel argues, and I think it's true, that things like humility, kindness, empathy, those earn you far more lasting respect than any material possession can.
Focus on the unseen wealth and the intangible qualities.
That seems to be the wiser path.
Okay, so we've covered a lot: core ideas, a spotlight, tips, myths. As we wrap up this deep dive on the psychology of money, what's the main thing you hope people take away?
I think fundamentally it's the recognition that understanding yourself, your own biases, your own history with money, your emotional triggers is the absolute starting point for making better financial decisions.
It's not just about learning formulas or market mechanics. It's about self-awareness first.
Exactly. Taking that honest look inward. How do you think about risk? What does enough mean to you? What are your ingrained beliefs about money, maybe from childhood?
And it's about closing that gap we mentioned at the start, right?
Yeah.
The gap between knowing what you should do and what you actually do.
That's the goal, aligning your actions with your real long-term intentions and values, using money as a tool to gain not just wealth, but freedom, control over your time.
Which is arguably the greatest dividend money can provide.
Couldn't agree more.
So maybe as you, our listener, reflect on this, think about which concept really clicked for you. Was it no one's crazy, wealth is what you don't see?
Or maybe one of the myths you realized you kind of believed.
Yeah. And maybe pick just one thing, one small behavioral change to try, or one practical tip to implement this week. Could be setting up automatic savings, or just pausing before making an impulsive purchase.
Small steps. And of course, if you want to go deeper, Housel's book is a great read, and exploring behavioral finance more broadly can be really enlightening.
Absolutely. But it all starts with understanding your own unique money mind. Thanks for diving deep with us today.